BlackRock and Vanguard. These two financial investment companies wield power so immense, it quietly shapes the world as we know it. To the average person, these names might sound like ordinary investment firms, but their influence is nothing short of a secret empire that controls the direction of industries and, to an extent, even the economic fate of entire nations. BlackRock and Vanguard collectively oversee nearly $20 trillion in assets, an amount so colossal it's nearly impossible to comprehend. To put it in perspective, their combined holdings are on par with the entire GDP of most countries. And no, I'm not talking about small, obscure countries. Their combined holdings amount to 75% of the annual GDP of the United States. This means these companies collectively manage financial assets nearly as large as the entire economic output of the United States over the course of an entire year. This financial muscle allows them to be among the top 3 shareholders in virtually every major publicly traded company in America. BlackRock owns approximately 8.7% of Apple, while Vanguard holds about 7.3%, together accounting for 16% of Apple's total shares. In Amazon, BlackRock controls roughly 6.9% of the company, with Vanguard holding about 6.1%. Their combined ownership of over 13% gives them immense influence over one of the world's largest retailers and cloud computing giants. In Microsoft, BlackRock and Vanguard hold close to 8.5% and 7% respectively, which translates to a controlling 15.5% say in their direction. Similar truths can be found in Google's parent company Alphabet, Coca-Cola, Pfizer, the largest US bank, JP Morgan Chase, Tesla, Walmart, ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson, as well as Meta Platforms, which controls Facebook and Instagram. These massive percentages, especially when combined and utilized together to push for shared interests, creates a voting coalition capable of steering corporate decisions from executive appointments to strategic policy shifts. The overlapping ownership stakes in these industry leaders effectively grant them the ability to synchronize policies across competing companies. These firms have a seat at every corporate table. Their reach even extends into sectors many might not suspect, such as media companies that shape public perception and defense contractors that profit from war. The leadership at both BlackRock and Vanguard therefore hold a terrifying level of power and control over the United States, wielding the power to shift the direction of the country in very significant ways. Breaking down the way these companies acquire this power is pretty simple. First, you need to have a general understanding of what ETFs and mutual funds are. If you don't, just think of them as baskets of many different company stocks that you can buy into all at once, letting you invest in a whole group of companies with just a single purchase. When you invest in a mutual fund or ETF run by Vanguard or BlackRock, like the Vanguard Total Market Fund, you have purchased and legally own the basket that holds the shares of the companies, and as those companies grow, so does the value of that basket. ETFs and mutual funds have essentially become a necessary component of every average American's retirement savings fund, allowing their money to grow over time. However, Vanguard or BlackRock are still the ones who own the actual individual stocks within that basket, like Apple, Amazon, Meta, etc. Because of this, these companies end up owning trillions of dollars in company shares using the money from other people's investment portfolios. These shares, when purchased on their own like this, can come with voting rights and other special privileges which Vanguard and BlackRock will keep for themselves and use to push their agendas and voices at corporate tables. When they vote, companies listen. Despite this extraordinary influence, BlackRock and Vanguard operate with almost no democratic accountability, no public oversight, and no political transparency. They are, in effect, a private financial oligarchy running a shadow government from behind the scenes. Because they hold significant stakes in defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, energy firms, and media outlets, these firms often profit during times of crisis, whether it's war, a pandemic, or environmental disaster. While there is no direct evidence that they orchestrate such events, their ability to rapidly reallocate capital and influence corporate decisions gives them a powerful advantage during periods of global instability. Additionally, both companies have promoted ESG, or environmental social governance investing, which critics claim is less about sustainability and more about pushing political or ideological agendas through corporate pressure. This has led to accusations that BlackRock and Vanguard are driving woke capitalism, as it has been called, to quietly stir cultural and political norms in line with elite, globalist, or even foreign interests. One of the darkest aspects of their empire lies in their involvement in the military-industrial complex. BlackRock and Vanguard are among the largest shareholders in defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing. These corporations manufacture the weapons and technology that fuel conflicts worldwide. While most people hope for peace and stability, these financial behemoths very clearly profit from perpetual war. No war means no production, and no production means no revenue. This creates a disturbing conflict of interest. They hold immense power to shape economic policy and corporate decisions, yet their investments directly benefit from global instability and violence. This unholy alliance between finance and warfare leads to the chilling realization that the architects of war may very well be hidden in the offices of Wall Street. It extends even further. This web of ownership means BlackRock and Vanguard collectively control the modern world's supply chains, political messaging, and even the products people consume daily. Even more horrifying, they have vast swaths of media companies in their portfolios, giving them a powerful hand in shaping public narratives through the news, television, and film. They own major shares in Disney, News Corp, Comcast, and Warner Bros., meaning they have significant control over ABC News, The Wall Street Journal, The Times, The Sun, NBC News, MSNBC, CNBC, CNN, HBO. I could go on, but we'd be here all day. Even worse, when the same financial actors own large shares in both the platforms distributing news and the corporations that the news covers, the potential for conflicts of interest and manipulation is enormous. Need I remind you, both BlackRock and Vanguard own a combined 15% of Google, who owns YouTube, meaning these two companies have a significant amount of influence over the very platform you're using to watch this video right now. Companies like this, therefore, may choose to suppress different criticisms of their two largest shareholders, meaning I should probably stop talking. Perhaps the most alarming is the way their ownership creates a near monopoly by proxy. BlackRock and Vanguard often collectively hold significant shares in companies that are supposed to be competitors. This concentration of power undermines the very foundation of a free market, reducing competition and innovation in favor of maintaining stability and protecting their vast investments. The illusion of market rivalry exists, but in reality, these two firms largely hold the reins. They are not just passive investors, they are active corporate governors managing a global empire that favors consolidation over diversity and control over competition. The firm has purchased entire neighborhoods of single-family homes, transforming what once was the American dream of homeownership into a rental market dominated by institutional landlords. This shift threatens to further entrench wealth inequality, pushing housing ownership out of reach for millions. They influence policymaking through lobbying and political donations, yet their power remains largely hidden from public scrutiny. These firms operate above the reach of ordinary citizens, manipulating global economic and political outcomes without accountability. The concentration of such power in the hands of a few creates an oligarchic system where elected officials are often mere pawns, and real decisions are made by those who control the purse. So, who governs the global economy? Who benefits from policies that prioritize corporate profits over social good? And what happens when the world's largest corporations are controlled by an invisible financial elite with interests that may run counter to public well-being? In analyzing the extent of BlackRock and Vanguard's reach, it becomes clear that elite corruption today is less about bribes and scandals and more about structural control. Control that is systemic, legalized, and normalized. These firms have built a vast financial empire that is deeply entrenched in every aspect of modern life, from the products we buy to the information we consume, and the very politicians that claim to serve and represent us, but may secretly hold allegiance to their financial benefactors. Understanding this reality is crucial to recognizing the true power dynamics of our time and the urgent need for transparency, accountability, and reform. In 1952, three brothers from Brooklyn, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler, purchased a small pharmaceutical company called Purdue Frederick. They all worked their way through medical school and established themselves as psychiatrists. Arthur Sackler specifically would transform the pharmaceutical industry forever, not through medical breakthroughs, but through revolutionary marketing techniques that appealed directly to doctors. He understood something that would prove catastrophically profitable: that medicine could be sold like any other product, and doctors could be influenced like any other customers. By the 1990s, the Sackler empire was facing a critical challenge. Their primary source of revenue, MS-Contin, a long-acting morphine pill used primarily for late-stage cancer patients, was losing its patent protection. Generics were about to flood the market and were almost certain to destroy their most important income stream. In response, Purdue Pharma created a solution in their labs, and you might have heard of it: OxyContin. This was a time-released version of oxycodone that they claimed would revolutionize pain management. They claimed that one dose of OxyContin would provide 12 hours of pain relief, which was twice as long as the other medications on the market. Patients would no longer need to wake up in the middle of the night for pills, doctors could prescribe less frequently, and most crucially, the slow release would supposedly make the drug less addictive. Internal documents later showed that even before OxyContin hit the market, clinical trials were revealing that many patients weren't getting 12 hours of relief. The drug wore off in as little as 6 hours for many people, leaving them in excruciating withdrawal that felt like their bones were breaking, their skin crawling, and their minds fragmenting. Their 12-hour promise was turning out to be a complete sham, but Purdue continued gripping to the 12-hour claim because their entire business model depended on it. Without that duration, OxyContin offered no advantage over the cheaper alternatives. Herein lies the dangers deeply embedded within privately owned pharmaceutical companies. Their loyalty, publicly, will always appear to be for their customers and patients, but privately, in the boardroom, well, it becomes obvious that their true loyalty lies elsewhere. When doctors began prescribing the shorter, more accurate intervals in the late 1990s, Purdue executives mobilized hundreds of sales representatives to, quote, refocus physicians on 12-hour dosing. The cornerstone of Purdue's deception lay in a single sentence added to OxyContin's FDA label, which stated, "Delayed absorption as provided by OxyContin tablets is believed to reduce the abuse liability of a drug." This phrase became their marketing mantra, repeated thousands of times to doctors across the country. The devastating truth, however, is that no clinical studies actually existed to support this claim. None. When later questioned under oath, Purdue executives admitted that they had provided no studies to the FDA to show that their formulation had reduced abuse potential. The sentence appeared to have been suggested during phone conversations with FDA officials, not based on scientific evidence. In short, it was medical marketing disguised as medical fact, and as the world would soon find out, the floodgates to one of the deadliest epidemics in American history had just been opened. Purdue assembled a sales force unlike anything the pharmaceutical industry had ever seen. With over 1,000 representatives, they became famous for paying the highest bonuses in the industry, enlisting their army to share the idea that OxyContin was non-addictive. Purdue's sales force made 531,000 visits to Pennsylvania doctors alone, targeting physicians who were already high prescribers of opioids. They used detailed prescriber profiles to identify doctors nationwide who wrote the most opioid prescriptions, essentially creating a map of medical professionals they could exploit and use as vessels to pitch and deliver their flawed product to the most vulnerable patients. The results of this aggressive, targeted marketing were staggering and tragic. OxyContin sales exploded from $48 million in 1996 to nearly $1.1 billion by 2000. By 2001 and 2002 combined, sales reached nearly $3 billion with over 14 million prescriptions. This ultimately would result in the Sackler family's wealth growing to nearly $11 billion. Their success came at an unimaginable human cost. Drug abusers quickly discovered that they could crush the time-release tablets and ingest the powder to get an intense, morphine-like high. What Purdue had created wasn't just a painkiller. It was a gateway drug that would funnel millions of Americans towards heroin and fentanyl addiction. Even as evidence began mounting of widespread addiction, the Sackler family's response revealed their true character and laser focus on profits alone, regardless of the human cost. In 2001, as reports of OxyContin addiction spread, Richard Sackler outlined a strategy in internal emails that would become their playbook for the next 2 decades. "We have to hammer on the abusers in every way possible," he wrote. "They are the culprits in the problem. They are reckless criminals." In a later 2019 lawsuit between the state of Connecticut and Purdue Pharma, along with the Sackler family, emails between Richard Sackler and a correspondent were released, revealing the blatantly disgusting mindset the executives of Purdue had for the victims of opioid addiction. One correspondent wrote to him, "Abusers die. Well, that is the choice they made. I doubt a single one didn't know of the risks." In reply, Sackler sent, "Abusers aren't victims. They are victimizers." He lamented that he couldn't publicly call addicts scum of the earth without becoming the poster child for liberals. From 1999 to 2020, nearly 841,000 Americans died from drug overdoses with prescription and illicit opioids responsible for 500,000 of those deaths. The opioid crisis has unfolded in 3 deadly waves so far. The first beginning in the 1990s with prescription opioids like OxyContin, the second around 2010 with heroin as users sought cheaper alternatives, and the third starting in 2013 with synthetic fentanyl flooding the market. By 2022, nearly 108,000 people were dying annually from drug overdoses, with opioids involved in about 82,000 of those. The entire opioid crisis we know today began with OxyContin as the main catalyst. Now, in 2024, the death toll from this crisis is steadily approaching 1 million people, largely resulting from the greed at Purdue Pharma. Their reckoning finally began in 2007, but even then, the repercussions for these executives felt relatively hollow. Purdue Pharma and 3 corporate leaders pleaded guilty to criminal charges of misbranding OxyContin by claiming that it was less addictive than other opioids. They paid $634 million in fines, one of the largest pharmaceutical settlements in history at the time, but the charges were reduced to misdemeanors with no jail time. The company treated this as a cost of doing business and, like nothing even happened, continued their aggressive marketing. The final chapter began in 2019 when Purdue filed for bankruptcy, facing not hundreds, but thousands of lawsuits from states, cities, counties, as well as individual victims and their families. In 2020, the company pleaded guilty to federal criminal charges and agreed to pay over $8 billion in settlements. While the company was stripped of a significant portion of their profits, the Sacklers seemed to mostly get away with their sins, free from prison, their pockets still stuffed with the dirtiest money conceivable. It turns out that between 2008 and 2018, as legal scrutiny intensified, the Sacklers extracted about $11 billion from Purdue, roughly 75% of the company's total assets, leaving the firm financially weakened before it filed for bankruptcy. This means that even after agreeing to contribute the $6 billion to the settlement to resolve civil lawsuits, the family still was able to get away with the several billion they had extracted from Purdue's profits at the height of the opioid crisis, essentially buying their freedom with billions still left over in profit for themselves. The bankruptcy court lamented that they were essentially forced to justify giving them this immunity because the Sacklers had protected their money in offshore accounts and trusts, making it unreachable through normal litigation. They siphoned the money they had made by engineering the opioid crisis and moved it outside the reach of the courts. For the families of the 500,000 dead, no amount of money can restore what was lost. The Sacklers transformed pain into profit, death into dollars, and human suffering into personal wealth. They didn't just sell a drug, they sold a lie that killed more Americans than the Vietnam War, and they did it knowing the truth from the very beginning. Their legacy is written in the graveyards filled with their victims. Shame on all of them. In the fall of 2016, rumors and whispers began to circulate around one of Hollywood's most powerful figures. Harvey Weinstein, sensing that his decades-long pattern of sex crimes was finally catching up to him, embarked on a sophisticated campaign of surveillance and intimidation to try and contain the mess he had made. He wouldn't hire just any firm of private investigators, but operatives from Black Cube, an enterprise run largely by former officers of Mossad and other Israeli intelligence agencies, along with operatives from Kroll, one of the world's largest corporate intelligence companies. Over a period of at least 30 years, Dozens of women accused Weinstein of a pattern of sexual harassment, assault, and rape. These accusations included forcing women to massage him, watch him naked, and, in some cases, coercing or forcing them into sexual acts by leveraging his immense power in the film industry, threatening their livelihood if they didn't fulfill his nauseating demands. Many of the women, including well-known actresses and aspiring performers, described how Weinstein promised to help advance their careers in exchange for sexual favors, or threatened to destroy their prospects if they refused. The criminal cases that followed focused on specific incidents such as the 2004 assault of Lucia Evans and the 2013 rape of aspiring actress Jessica Mann in a Manhattan hotel room. Former production assistant Miriam Haley also accused Weinstein of forcibly performing oral sex on her in his apartment in 2006. As Weinstein felt a change in the air surrounding the silence of his victims, he approached Black Cube, presenting itself as an elite operation, offering clients the skills of highly experienced operatives trained within Israel's elite military and intelligence units. With branches in Tel Aviv, London, and Paris, this wasn't some backroom detective agency. This was military-grade intelligence expertise being deployed against journalists and victims of one of Hollywood's most disgusting elite. The explicit goal, laid out in stark terms in a contract signed in July of 2017, was to stop the publication of abuse allegations against Weinstein that would eventually emerge in the New York Times and the New Yorker. This wasn't damage control. This was warfare against the truth. According to the article published by The New Yorker on November 6, 2017, 2 private investigators from Black Cube, operating under completely fabricated identities, systematically targeted actress Rose McGowan, who would eventually publicly accuse Weinstein of rape. One of these operatives even assumed the false identity of a women's rights advocate, the very cause McGowan championed, and secretly recorded at least 4 meetings with the actress. This is just an egregious level of psychological manipulation. Using McGowan's own advocacy against sexual violence as a weapon to extract information that could be used to silence her. But the deception didn't stop there. The same operative, now using yet another false identity, approached a journalist while implying that she herself had an allegation against Weinstein. At this point, it becomes clear that Weinstein wasn't working with Black Cube to just monitor his victims. This was a deliberate attempt to infiltrate the very networks of survivors and journalists who were working to expose the truth, and to silence their cries beneath their boots. The New Yorker article goes on to explain how, over the course of a year, Weinstein's private army targeted dozens of individuals, compiling psychological profiles that sometimes focused on acquiring their personal or sexual histories, all in an attempt to find vulnerabilities that could be exploited to achieve silence. Weinstein would monitor the progress of these investigations personally. He even went as far as to enlist former employees from his film enterprises to join the effort, creating a horrifying elite complicity network. This was a man using every resource at his disposal, leveraging relationships and power built over decades in the entertainment industry to suppress horrifying allegations of sexual assault, rape, and harassment. Simultaneously, as this shadow campaign was unfolding, the walls already began closing in. On October 5th, 2017, the New York Times published an explosive article detailing decades of allegations of sexual harassment against Harvey Weinstein. Despite all of Weinstein's efforts, despite the surveillance and the psychological profiles and the false identities, The truth had broken through into the light, as it always does and always will. He issued an apology acknowledging that he, quote, has caused a lot of pain, while simultaneously disputing the allegations, claiming that he was taking a leave of absence from the Weinstein Company and working with a therapist. But the floodgates had opened. This was the beginning of the end. Just 3 days later, Weinstein was fired by his own company's board in light of new information about misconduct. As more women came forward, the scope of Weinstein's crimes became staggering. At least 100 women would eventually say that the producer sexually harassed or assaulted them. While reports of this behavior went back decades, Weinstein had never faced criminal action until the dam of silence finally burst. After 5 days of deliberation following weeks of graphic testimony from 6 women, the jury found Weinstein guilty of a criminal sexual act in the 1st degree and rape in the 3rd degree. The man who had deployed Israeli intelligence operatives to silence his accusers was sentenced to 23 years in prison. Prosecutors in Los Angeles filed their own charges, and a jury found him guilty as well, earning him 16 more years behind bars to be served after his New York sentence. The Black Cube scandal revealed something far more sinister than one man's crimes. This wasn't just about Harvey Weinstein. It was about a system where the wealthy and powerful could deploy sophisticated surveillance operations against journalists and victims with impunity. Despite a year-long campaign conducted by one of the world's leading private intelligence operations, the courage of survivors and the persistence of journalists ultimately overpowered all of Weinstein's power, money, and connections. In my opinion, in many ways, this case actually demonstrates a lot of hope for the truth eventually coming out in cases of corruption like this. With that being said, however, Black Cube still continues to operate today and has essentially faced zero repercussions for their involvement in the Weinstein case. Every year, American taxpayers hand over nearly $1 trillion to the Pentagon. We're forced into blind trust that our military leaders will use that money responsibly to keep us safe from foreign threats. You wouldn't want to cut defense spending only for a war to break out, leaving our homeland exposed. Better safe than sorry, right? Well, what if I told you that for over 2 decades, the Department of Defense has been operating like a criminal enterprise, cooking the books and making trillions of dollars disappear into thin air? What if I told you that while families struggle to pay for healthcare, education, and basic infrastructure, defense contractors are getting rich off a system so corrupt that even the Pentagon's own accountants are forced to falsify records just to make the numbers add up? This is not a conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, it's far from it. Documented fact. Since 1996, federal law has required every government agency to pass an annual audit. Every single department has complied, except one. For 7 consecutive years since the audits became mandatory in 2018, the Defense Department has failed spectacularly. It's kind of impressive how horribly they have managed their spending and gotten away with it. The scale of this fraud is literally beyond comprehension. These numbers are so big that there is no way to even process the power that this money had before it completely vanished into thin air. In 2019 alone, the Pentagon reported $35 trillion in accounting adjustments. Now, this doesn't mean $35 trillion actually vanished or was stolen. Instead, it reflects a staggering amount of money being shuffled back and forth between different Pentagon accounts, often multiple times due to sloppy, outdated, and error-prone bookkeeping systems. Imagine moving the same $100 from your checking account to savings, then to a retirement fund, and back again, over and over and over until your bank statement shows that you've made $3,500 in transfers, even though you only ever had $100. When the Pentagon's books are so tangled that no one can say for sure what assets exist or where the money is actually going, it opens the door to staggering waste, fraud, and abuse. Without reliable records, Congress and the public have no way of knowing how tax dollars are really being spent or whether billions are being lost, misused, or even siphoned into secret projects or accounts that will never again see the light of day. They literally can't account for 63% of their $4 trillion in assets. We're talking missing Black Hawk helicopters, fighter jets, and weapon systems that auditors couldn't even verify exist. The story of Linda Woodford helps us to understand how we got here. She was a whistleblower who spent 15 years of her career doing something that should terrify every American: deliberately entering false numbers into the Pentagon's financial records. Every single month, Woodford and her colleagues at the Defense Finance and Accounting Service would receive a flood of inaccurate, missing, or completely fabricated numbers from the military branches. When the data didn't match what the Treasury expected, supervisors ordered them to create plugs, or fake entries designed to make the books balance. Thousands of these fraudulent entries were made every single month with their supervisor's approval. Jeff Yokel, another former Pentagon accountant, confirmed this systematic fraud when he said, if the accounts didn't balance, the Treasury would hit it back to you. So they just made up numbers. A couple million here, a couple billion there. For what? Who knows? Who cares? Just balance the books so the Treasury stops bugging us. In 2009, a single Pentagon office in Columbus, Ohio, made at least $1.59 trillion in errors, including $538 billion in fake entries. That's more than the Air Force's entire budget for that year on literally nothing. Completely non-existent figures. The real crime here, though, isn't just the inefficiency or the fake accounting. It's the fact that we literally have no idea where so much of our money actually went. And that's almost always a very, very bad sign. While Pentagon officials claim they can't track spending, defense contractors are getting obscenely rich through a rigged system of no-bid contracts. These are agreements in which the government awards a contract directly to a specific company without opening the process up to competition from other vendors. In regular contracts, multiple companies will submit bids, and the government chooses the best offer, but no-bid contracts skip this competitive step entirely. Without this competition, there's a higher risk of inflated prices, waste, and favoritism. The lack of transparency and oversight makes it easier for funds to be misused or for contractors to underperform without consequences. Since 1998, the Pentagon has awarded $362 billion in contracts without competitive bidding. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon don't even pretend to offer fair prices anymore. They just charge us insane amounts of money since there's no competition, and we pay it. If the government really wanted to spend your money efficiently, why wouldn't they open up contracts to bidding? Why not allow competition to make companies work to earn the business of the most powerful military on the planet? I don't need to tell you why, because you already know why. It's obvious. And no, it's not incompetence, and it's not laziness. It's not even waste. It's fraud, it's corruption, and it's favoritism. It's the military-industrial complex. Our government officials are in bed with these defense contractors, and in the end, they all personally get a slice of your money. Want to know how insane this theft has become? Maybe you don't, but you need to hear it anyways. Boeing charged the Pentagon over $200,000 for 4 trash cans. That's more than $51,000 per can. The same trash cans they used to sell for just $300 each. This kind of theft is common, but at least it's documented in the books. The trillions of dollars we're talking about right now isn't even accounted for anywhere. There is a massive cost to the American quality of life as a result of this corruption. While defense contractors buy their third vacation homes, American infrastructure completely crumbles. Schools lack basic supplies, healthcare remains unaffordable for millions, and communities can't afford to fix their roads or bridges. Again, don't be deceived. When there's this much money involved, it's not incompetence. It's theft, and it's on purpose. The Pentagon deliberately cut 130,000 employees whose jobs were to negotiate and oversee defense contracts. They created a system where 5 megacorporations control nearly all military contracting, eliminating competition and accountability. While American families choose between medicine and groceries, defense contractors spend $83 million per election cycle buying congressional votes. They strategically place facilities in key congressional districts, ensuring that representatives become dependent on defense jobs. The pharmaceutical industry has constructed one of the most sophisticated and pervasive influence networks in American politics, using billions of dollars to shape legislation, control medical research, manipulate regulatory processes, and engineer public opinion. Over time, this has resulted in their stranglehold on the very institutions meant to protect public health and democratic governance, shifting loyalty away from the citizens of the United States and towards the very corporations these agencies were enlisted to rein in. In the 2023-2024 election cycle alone, pharmaceutical and health product PACs, or political action committees, groups that collect and spend money to influence elections and support candidates, funneled over $16 million directly into the wallets of candidates running for office in the federal government. This is just the tip of an iceberg that extends far deeper into the machinery of American democracy. Major pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer, Amgen, AbbVie, and Abbott Laboratories each contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars, with the money flowing strategically to both Democrats and Republicans who can push policy in their favor. By playing both sides of the aisle, the pharmaceutical industry maintains its grip on policymaking, regardless of which party currently controls Congress. During the first 9 months of 2017, 153 companies and organizations reported lobbying on drug pricing, a number that has grown from just 37 in 2013. This means the industry is beginning to pool more and more resources together to protect their ability to set prices on prescription drugs, keeping them exceedingly high for Americans. 22 of the world's largest drug and biotechnology firms alone spent over $80 million lobbying in that period, all to prevent lawmakers from passing laws that would make prescription drugs more affordable for Americans, including those without insurance. These drug companies don't just oppose unfavorable bills, they actively write the alternatives, crafting language that appears to address public concerns, but with the true purpose of protecting industry profits. Beyond this direct political influence, pharmaceutical companies have also infiltrated medical education and research institutions, taking control of the production of healthcare knowledge and steering the contents of educational systems to align with the goals of Big Pharma. Through programs like Pfizer's Independent Medical Education Grants, pharmaceutical companies fund educational initiatives that align with their commercial interests. This shapes medical training and knowledge in ways that prioritize certain treatments, the products that Big Pharma sells. Universities and medical organizations accepting these grants benefit from financial support that these pharmaceutical companies provide, but clearly the drug companies will need to see some return on their so-called philanthropy. Remember, the goal of these large corporations is always their bottom line. And their edge comes from the fact that these funded speakers can emphasize topics that favor the company's commercial interests, subtly influencing healthcare professionals and fostering greater awareness of issues tied to corporate products. The corruption of medical research reaches even deeper through the widespread use of ghostwriters in scientific publishing. Professional medical writers, often funded by pharmaceutical companies, craft research articles that are then published under the names of established scientists and physicians. These ghost-written papers frequently minimize adverse effects while amplifying benefits, creating a distorted scientific literature that influences prescribing practices worldwide. Doctors rely on what they believe is independent research to make treatment decisions. This has horrific consequences when you realize that they may be following corporate marketing strategies disguised as scientific evidence when trying to form a recovery plan for their patients. Even a good doctor whom you may trust with your life is hindered by polluted sources of information. This manipulation extends to the Food and Drug Administration's approval process, where pharmaceutical companies leverage their financial resources to influence legal outcomes. Major corporations within the pharmaceutical industry consistently go out of their way to employ former FDA officials as consultants and lobbyists, creating a revolving door that ensures corporate interests have inside knowledge of regulatory processes and direct connections with decision makers. When citizens wonder why life-saving treatments cost hundreds of times more in America than in other countries, why breakthrough treatments remain inaccessible to those who need them most, or why Congress seems completely incapable of meaningful healthcare reform, the answer lies in this web of influence that pharmaceutical companies have spent decades and billions of dollars constructing. While Americans struggle with inflation and economic uncertainty, some of their elected representatives appear to possess an almost supernatural ability to predict market movements, timing their stock trades with uncanny precision just before major regulatory announcements and policy decisions. The most scrutinized figure in this web of likely corruption is former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, whose family's trading portfolio feels like a sort of open secret of insider trading, almost like they get a kick out of openly flaunting it in our faces. Along with her venture capitalist husband, Paul Pelosi, the two have amassed an estimated net worth exceeding $240 million, a staggering fortune dwarfing Pelosi's annual salary of $223,500 as Speaker of the House. She now collects even less, $174,000 as a regular member of Congress. The math just doesn't add up when you consider that this accumulation all occurred while she was supposedly dedicating her full attention to righteously serving the public. The Pelosi family's investment portfolio reveals holdings that seem strategically positioned ahead of major policy shifts. Their stock positions include Apple shares valued between $25 million and $50 million, along with substantial holdings in Microsoft, Salesforce, Google, and Amazon, each worth between $5 million and $25 million. These aren't the modest investments of a public servant trying to save for a comfortable living in retirement. They represent concentrated wealth typically observed in the portfolios of powerful hedge fund managers. What makes these holdings especially suspicious is their laser focus on companies that frequently find themselves at the center of congressional hearings and regulatory discussions. The kind of companies at the mercy of decisions Nancy would have early insider knowledge on. One extremely damning example of this exact scenario happened in June of 2022 when Paul Pelosi purchased up to $5 million worth of Nvidia stock, a timing that was particularly suspicious given that this occurred just 1 month before a crucial Senate vote on the CHIPS and Science Act, a subsidy package which would grant $52 billion to companies in the semiconductor industry, from which Nvidia certainly benefited, with their stock price surging during key legislative milestones. This looked absolutely appalling from the public eye. While Nancy Pelosi possessed intimate knowledge of pending legislation that would directly benefit chip manufacturers, her husband was making massive bets on the very companies that stood to profit most from government subsidies. On July 1st of 2024, Paul Pelosi sold 2,000 shares of Visa stock for at least $500,000. This sale occurred just months before the Department of Justice filed a major antitrust lawsuit against Visa, alleging that the company maintained an illegal monopoly over the U.S. debit card market. The timing of this sale, coming before a significant legal action that would inevitably harm Visa's stock price, raises serious suspicions about the possibility of the Pelosi's exercising advanced knowledge of the impending federal investigation. The 2020 Congressional insider trading scandal is yet another disappointing case. This scandal revealed that multiple senators exploited their privileged access to classified briefings about the COVID-19 pandemic to profit from the incoming economic catastrophe before the public knew what was on the horizon. On January 24th of 2020, Senate committees held a closed meeting briefing senators about the pandemic and its potential impact on the United States, specifically on the economy. Senators who had just learned about the impending global pandemic immediately rushed to reposition their portfolios before the information became public. Senator Kelly Loeffler and her husband Jeffrey Sprecher, who happened to be the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, executed 27 transactions selling stock worth between $1.3 million and $3.1 million in order to bail out of the economy before the collapse, while simultaneously purchasing shares in Citrix Systems, a software company that provides tools for remote work. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as remote work became essential, demand for Citrix's services surged as the company would benefit from the coming remote work revolution. Senator David Perdue was even more blatantly aggressive with his trades, making 112 transactions that included selling around $825,000 in vulnerable stocks, while purchasing $1.8 million in companies positioned to profit from the pandemic. Perhaps most cynically, Purdue began buying approximately $185,000 worth of DuPont stock, a company that manufactures personal protective equipment like masks, on the very same day as the classified Senate briefing. The Department of Justice launched an investigation into these trades on March 30th, 2020, but in a pattern that has become all too familiar when investigating elite corruption, no charges were ever brought against anyone involved. The investigation was quietly closed, allowing these senators to keep their profits, while ordinary Americans faced unemployment, business closures, and financial ruin from a pandemic that these same legislators had advance warning about. Despite the Stock Act of 2012, which was specifically designed to prohibit the use of non-public information for private profit by members of Congress, enforcement appears to be virtually non-existent. The law exists on paper, but the reality is that congressional members and their families continue to trade with apparent impunity, using their privileged positions to accumulate wealth that would be impossible through legitimate means. Nancy Pelosi herself had been surprisingly candid about her opposition to restrictions on congressional trading, stating in December of 2021, quote, "We are a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that." This defense is just a complete spit in the face to average Americans, as this participation she's referring to involves leveraging a privileged representational position for personal profit, actions that would land any private citizen in federal prison. Until meaningful enforcement is put in place with real consequences, corruption like this will continue to flourish in the shadows of American democracy, eroding public trust and demonstrating to the American people that there are ultimately two sets of rules, one for us and another for the connected elite. In the spring of 2016, the world witnessed one of the largest data leaks in human history. On April 3rd, more than 370 journalists across over 100 publications simultaneously released a bombshell investigation that would shake the foundations of global finance and expose the hidden wealth of the world's most powerful people. The story of the Panama Papers begins with an anonymous whistleblower, known to this day only as John Doe, who had gained access to the internal files of Mossack Fonseca, a Panamanian law firm that few people outside of the offshore finance world had ever heard of. This mysterious source, driven by what they called income inequality as a defining issue of our time, leaked an astronomical 11.5 million documents, 2.6 terabytes of data, spanning all the way back from 1970 to 2015, representing virtually every document produced from the firm. Mossack Fonseca had quietly grown to become the world's fourth largest provider of offshore financial services. Operating from Panama with 600 employees spread across 42 countries, the firm specialized in what insiders euphemistically called selling vehicles to avoid taxes. An internal memo revealed that 95% of their business consisted of exactly that. The leaked documents exposed a sophisticated web of financial secrecy that implicated at least 140 politicians from more than 50 countries in elaborate tax evasion schemes. The firm's services weren't technically illegal, but they operated in moral gray areas, creating what investigators called complex shell company structures that allowed clients to hide behind an often impenetrable wall of secrecy. They were multi-layered, multinational corporate mazes designed to obscure the true ownership of assets and money. The documents traced $2 billion in hidden money connected to Vladimir Putin through accounts held by family members and close associates. Within days of publication, Icelandic Prime Minister Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson resigned after it was revealed that he and his wife had owned an offshore company, Wintris Incorporated, which held millions in bonds from Icelandic banks that collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis. This revealed conflicts of interest with his policies and public standings on issues related to the financial crisis, and after public anger mounted, he was forced to resign. The brother-in-law of President Xi Jinping was named as the owner of several offshore companies involved in real estate and investment. The Chinese government swiftly censored domestic media coverage of the incident. King Salman of Saudi Arabia was directly named in the Panama Papers, with documents revealing his connection to two British Virgin Islands-based companies, Verse Development Corporation and Inro Corporation. While his precise role in these companies remains unspecified, the transactions were consistently linked to his personal assets, demonstrating that even reigning monarchs will utilize secretive offshore structures to maintain and conceal their vast wealth. In Pakistan, the revelations led to a landmark Supreme Court case that resulted in the country's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif being disqualified from office for life after the documents uncovered links between his family and 8 offshore companies. Others listed in the Panama Papers were the then Ukrainian president, a former Argentine president, a former United Arab Emirates president, former Georgian Prime Minister, former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, relatives of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, the late father of UK Prime Minister David Cameron, and even celebrities like Lionel Messi and Jackie Chan. Police raided Mossack Fonseca's offices in Panama, Peru, and El Salvador. Eventually, a searchable database containing information about companies, trusts, and foundations in 21 tax havens was released, linking to people in more than 200 countries. Mossack Fonseca itself obviously didn't survive the scrutiny. Despite the founders' attempts to portray themselves as victims of hacking, the firm buckled under the weight of lawsuits and global pressure, finally closing its doors in March of 2018. In the end, the company was brought down by the very secrecy that had made it successful. In 2013, a young psychology professor named Alexander Krogan created what seemed like an innocent personality quiz app called This Is Your Digital Life. Users were paid a few dollars to take this test, answering questions about their personalities, while the app quietly harvested their Facebook data in the background. The crazy part, though, is that it didn't just grab data from the 270,000 people who willingly took the quiz. Facebook's API allowed extremely broad data harvesting, which allowed the app to even access the profiles of every single one of their friends, ultimately collecting the personal information of up to 87 million Americans. This means private likes, comments, posts, and user locations. So, if you even had a friend who took this quiz, your private life was suddenly for sale, and you had no idea. This wasn't some rogue operation by a lone actor. Behind Kogan stood Cambridge Analytica, a British data firm that was essentially the plaything of Robert Mercer, a billionaire hedge fund manager who had already pumped millions into right-wing causes. Steve Bannon, the man who would later become Trump's chief strategist, sat on Cambridge Analytica's board and approved the data collection scheme that would harvest millions of Americans' digital lives. Kogan would then sell all of the data that he harvested from the quiz to Cambridge Analytica. And Cambridge Analytica didn't just use it for traditional advertising, they weaponized it for psychographic profiling, a technique that goes far beyond knowing just your age or income. They built psychological profiles of American voters, identifying who was neurotic, who was open to new experiences, who was prone to fear and conspiracy theories. Then they crafted individual messages designed to manipulate each person's specific psychological vulnerabilities. If you were prone to anxiety, they'd show you fear-based political ads. If you were open to new experiences, they'd target you with messages about change. The Trump campaign became Cambridge Analytica's most prominent client, and the firm bragged about running 5,000-plus ad campaigns that generated over 1.5 billion impressions for Trump. They also simultaneously ran a voter suppression operation. It would eventually come to light that Cambridge Analytica categorized 3.5 million Black Americans under a label called deterrence, meaning voters they wanted to discourage from participating in democracy altogether. Meanwhile, Facebook executives knew exactly what was happening and did nothing to stop it. The company had been warned as early as 2015 that Cambridge Analytica was misusing user data, but they simply asked the firm to delete the information and took their word for it. Facebook obviously is making billions of dollars from this surveillance advertising model. $40 billion in advertising revenue in 2017 alone by turning human beings into products. As they say, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, and that's absolutely true for all social media platforms. The FTC eventually fined Facebook $5 billion for violating a 2011 consent decree that required them to protect user privacy. But that fine represented less than Facebook made in 3 months. This led to Facebook's stock price actually shooting up when the settlement was announced because investors were relieved that it wasn't higher. For shareholders, a $5 billion fine was little more than a speed bump. Cambridge Analytica may have shut down in 2018, but the surveillance infrastructure they exploited is still running rampant today. Social media companies across the board still collect massive amounts of your personal data and use that information to manipulate you. It's still used to scare you, to change your social or political views, or to make you consume different products or services. But you already knew that.